HP the fourth champion PT4. Hermione had barely slept during the night. She had agreed to meet Harry Potter for breakfast, much to her best friend Ginny's delight. But they were supposed to join several Ravenclaws as well. Hermione only ever felt this anxious right before exams. The trouble was, this wasn't something you could study for. She wasn't even quite sure what it was Harry wanted to do. He had said it was going to be some kind of experiment. He seemed confident that he would be able to change people's minds about her. The problem was, she didn't think Harry knew what he was getting into. Deciding that she was clearly not going to get any more sleep. She threw her blankets off and threw her pajama-clad legs out of her bed, keeping as quiet as possible so as not to wake her roommates, who would likely hex her. Padding softly to her trunk, she collected her clothes and toiletries and headed into the bathroom to get cleaned up and ready for the day. When she had completed getting ready, she saw that it was still an hour before she was to meet Harry. She slipped into the common room and sat down on one of the sofas, taking out her arithmancy book and trying to study. Her mind was definitely not interested in the subject at all. Hermione couldn't stop herself and she kept imagining what might happen when she met Harry that morning. What would he do when the Ravenclaw girls made it clear they didn't want her around at all? Would he just shrug and smile and go off with all those pretty girls, forgetting her completely, or would he actually do as he said and go eat the morning meal with her someplace else? She had a very hard time imagining that Harry would keep to his word. He was a normal 14-year-old boy. With that many pretty girls interested in him, he would most likely follow his hormones and she'd be left standing there looking stupid. Again, so why was she even bothering to worry about any of it? Why was she so nervous? Why the hell was she even planning on meeting Harry Potter in the first damned place? Because he'd been nice to her. "Are we friends?" she had asked him, looking into those deep green pools, fighting down the strange hope she felt when he smiled at her. "Don't know yet," he had said. "I don't know you yet, and you don't know me. But, we're going to spend some time together and then we'll decide. At the very least, we'll actually have our opinions of each other based on time we've spent together instead of just presuming we wouldn't get along. Sound all right?" That was why he was willing to make an effort. He wanted to get to know her and see if they could be friends. So far as he knew, they might share common interests, enjoy each other's company. And the truth was, she actually wanted to be his friend. That's why she had agreed to this craziness. She wanted to be friends with this new boy. Not the famous boy most everyone was tripping over themselves to meet or associate with. She wanted to be friends with the Harry that had been so very honest with her, and had defended her against Ron Weasley. Before he even really knew her name. Deciding she was not going to get any reading done, she decided to head down to the Great Hall and wait. Her only reasoning was that if she walked slowly, it would at least kill time. As she hit the bottom of the grand staircase, she thought she saw Harry going down a hallway, but she wasn't sure. She thought it strange that he would even be awake. Then again, he had wanted to meet her at 7:30. Most of her Gryffindor housemates were only just waking up then. Hermione went into the Great Hall and took a seat at the Gryffindor table closest to the entrance where she would be clearly visible. When Harry returned, about 10 minutes later, people began pouring into the Great Hall, most of the 6th years or older, though she did see a few first years. Little by little the Great Hall started to fill with more and more students. Then she saw the Ravenclaw 4th years take up station just outside of the Great Hall, all of them looking as if they'd taken great care with their appearances this morning. Hermione's fear began to rise again as she watched them. A moment later it was clear that Harry had shown up, and the girls were greeting him. The Asian girl, Sully, led the charge, calling out a big good morning. Hermione couldn't see Harry, but it was clear that he was there as the girls circled around him protectively. They didn't seem to be moving into the Great Hall, and Hermione realized that she had promised to meet him outside of the Great Hall. Preparing herself for the worst, Hermione stood and went out to meet them all. "Oh, there you are," Harry said the moment he spotted her. He stepped out of the circle and turned to face them, keeping himself between them. "Ladies, this is Hermione Granger, and I asked her to join us this morning." Harry smiled to the Ravenclaws. "What?" Eloise Midgen all but shouted, looking very indignant. "Why? Do you have a problem with that?" Harry asked. Hermione could see the other girls all looking at Eloise as if she'd just told them the sky was now orange. Eloise seemed not to have noticed as she stared coldly at Hermione. "I thought we were going to get to know you, Harry. I didn't know we'd be entertaining a big-headed social reject like Granger. She thinks she's something amazing. Merlin's gift to magic." Eloise spit. "Funny, I never got that impression," Harry said. Looking at Hermione, who looked as if all she wanted to do was scamper away. "You haven't had the misfortune of being stuck in this school with her the past 3 years. She shows off in every class like she's the perfect witch. She takes so much pleasure in showing everyone up and being every teacher's favorite pet. It's disgusting. Trust me, the more distance you put between yourself and Granger, the better off you are." Eloise finished, crossing her arms over her chest and glaring at Hermione. Harry said thoughtfully. "Let me ask you something." Harry winked at Hermione and then turned to face Eloise fully. "Have you ever talked to her? I mean, not insult her, but actually talk to her? Do you know anything about her beyond that she seems quite good in class and has enough pride in herself to do as well as she can?" Eloise stepped back as if Harry just slapped her. She looked to her friends for support, but it was clear they were not going to get in the middle of this even more. Her best friend had become intensely interested in watching people come down the staircase for breakfast. "So, you've wasted 3 years insulting her, and you don't know spit about her. Everyone seems to be so intent on getting to know me, but I find it strange that there are so many interesting people who are already here." He looked at each girl in turn as he spoke now. "But here's a great opportunity to fix it. Why not forget everything you think you know about Hermione here and spend a little time with her? Ask her questions, and give her the chance to do the same. I'm not saying you'll become the best of friends, but at the very least you'll have facts to base your judgment on." To everyone's surprise, especially those who knew her so well, Mandy Brocklehurst stepped forward and linked her arm in Hermione's and began leading her into the Great Hall. Sully looked at Padma and then Lisa with awe. Mandy was very shy and never ever initiated anything. Harry gave a wide smile and followed after the 2 girls, leaving the other 5 gawking. "I just screwed up royally. Didn't I?" Eloise asked sullenly. "Most assuredly." They all turned to see Luna Lovegood standing behind them, smiling her rather vacant dreamy smile as she looked at them all in turn. "He's very interesting, isn't he? He seems to have this thing about helping people who seem to be having trouble, as well as this of us who think we know it all. He knows the real value of friendship and doesn't seem afraid to risk the possibility of losing potential friends in favor of people who will be more appreciative of him in the long run. Hermione, for all her faults, knows how valuable a true friend can be. It's why they will be friends until they die. I actually envy them both." She smiled softly and headed into the Great Hall, leaving 5 very stunned housemates in her wake. "Okay, seriously," Sue said at long last. "When did the world go all barmy, and Loony Lovegood become the damned voice of reason? She really did have some good points." Padma agreed, looking to where Harry, Hermione, and Mandy sat. She then noticed that Harry waved Luna over to sit next to him. "And what's worse, is she's actually gotten closer to him than any of us will ever hope to be if we don't start using our brains and thinking of him instead of ourselves. Plus he's got a real point. There are loads of interesting people around here, and we've just isolated ourselves. Who knows what we're missing? Sully said, watching as Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan walked past. I mean, think of all the possibilities. Yeah. Lisa grinned. Dean's one of the few boys in this school taller than me, not to mention that really cute dimple when he smiles. Whoa. Padma turned sharply. You've never mentioned Dean before. I know. Lisa said flatly, still focused on the tall dark-skinned boy. I don't know why I thought that I would only date another Ravenclaw. Makes you wonder how we all got so brainwashed and convinced not to go outside of our own houses. Look at all we've been missing. And I don't think I want to miss any more. See ya in class. Lisa gave a little wave and dashed into the Great Hall after Dean Thomas. Oh Harry. What have you started? Sue asked, making Padma and Morag laugh while Eloise just stared at Hermione Granger feeling very foolish. Harry was having a really good day. He had proven Hermione wrong, and he was sure that she and Mandy Brocklehurst were on their way to becoming friends. In fact, the two girls had all but ignored him at breakfast, losing themselves in a conversation centered on arithmancy. Harry hadn't minded as it gave him the chance to talk to Luna Lovegood, who had been real entertaining. Luna had a very unique view of the world, and Harry was sure she had spoken in riddles to him throughout breakfast. Still, Harry liked her. It was hard not to. With her easy smile and her soft smile, Luna was very pretty. But more than that, she was fun to be around. The way she talked about strange creatures, and patiently explained them to him, she even had Harry believing there might be something to them. Her conviction was admirable, and Harry just had an immense amount of respect for the girl immediately. Harry's first class for the day turned out to be Charms, where he joined Tracy and Daphne and the other Slytherins, as well as the Ravenclaws. Harry caught some of the Ravenclaws throwing glances his way, but he kept focus on the tiny teacher's lesson. Harry was sure that if he could get Professor Flitwick and Professor Madigan together, it would be a very entertaining and educational time. Harry enjoyed the practical part of the lesson as it gave him a chance to talk with the two Slytherin girls, and was introduced to Theodore Nott and Blaise Zabinai, who were rather monosyllabic. Harry guessed they were still on the fence about whether to like Harry or not. Harry wasn't too concerned. The Slytherins joined Harry for his next class, where they joined the Gryffindors on the grounds for care of magical creatures. Harry had never been more freaked out in his life. Hagrid presented blast-ended scroats and made all the students partner up to take the strange lobster-like creatures for a walk to burn off pent-up energy. These things are so horrible, Tracy said as she and Harry tried guiding their scroat around the grounds. I'm still trying to figure out what they are, Harry said, holding tight to the leash. Tracy refused to take a turn holding the leash, and Harry now understood why. Twice now the scroat's tail had ignited and dragged Harry across the ground, much to Tracy's delight it seemed. Even now she was having trouble not smiling. In spite of it all, Harry didn't really mind as Tracy's smirk was quite fetching. What has he said about these things? Only what he finds interesting. Stingers, suckers, pincers. Tracy shrugged, looking over to where Daphne and Blaise were trying to fight their own scroats and guided where they wanted to go. I swear if he could, he'd bring a damn dragon for us to study. Actually, I don't think I'd mind studying a dragon. You know, so long as it was caged and it couldn't breathe fire at me. Harry shrugged, thinking of becoming a dragon handler after school. Tracy smiled and Harry shrugged. I have absolutely no idea what I want to do when school is finished. I'd like to play professional Quidditch, but I think I could only do that for a few years. Same with racing. and there's a good chance that I might not get drafted for a professional team. Sounds like you've put a fair amount of thought into this, Tracy said, making Harry shrug again. I suppose we're all about that age where we start thinking about that sort of thing. He smiled. The Scroot was no inspecting a patch of ground, no longer concerned with the two teens or the leash around its middle. I sometimes think it would be cool to be in law enforcement. My dad and my godfather were set to become Aurors before things happened to change it all. Sirius told me they were just finishing their training when Mom and Dad had to go into hiding. That's a pretty admirable ambition. Tracy nodded, keeping a wary eye on the Scroot who seemed to have settled into a patch of mud. I want to be a curse breaker. I think it would be really exciting to go into ancient tombs and discover treasure and artifacts hidden away by wizards ages ago. Plus, curse breakers make loads of gold. Nothing wrong with making a bit of gold. Harry nodded approvingly. So long as you remember that there's more to life. Another bit of advice from your godfather? Tracy asked with a smirk. Harry nodded. I sometimes think he's trying to make sure I don't make the same mistakes as he or my father did. Like he's trying to keep a promise to my parents or something. I've asked him about it a few times, but he just shakes his head and says it's his job to make sure I grow into a good man. Harry shrugged and the two fell silent, both turning to look at the Scroot that seemed to be sleeping in the patch of mud now. Harry could feel Tracy's eyes turn on him, and saw her fidgeting a bit out of the corner of his eye. So, you know this weekend we're allowed to go to the village? Tracy stuttered out. Harry nodded, turning to look at her. Tracy's face went scarlet as he captured her gaze. Tracy had to look away after a second if she hoped to continue. I was wondering if maybe you'd like to go? You know, with me. She managed to finally get out. Harry kept silent until she turned to look at him again. He was smiling at her, and she felt her face go red again. I'd like that. However, I'm meeting my godfather in the morning, so I don't think I'll be free until the afternoon, he said, looking apologetic. Tracy merely smiled brightly in return and shrugged. We could meet at the Three Broomsticks and have a late lunch and then visit the shops, she suggested, and Harry nodded in agreement. That sounds great. Harry grinned. Now, if only it were Friday so we didn't have to wait so long. Tracy could only laugh. Hagrid called the end of class and all around them their classmates were trying very hard to get their Scroots back to Hagrid. Harry and Tracy looked at their sleeping Scroot and then at each other. I really don't fancy waking this thing, Tracy said with a rather frightened look on her face. Then I really hope this works, Harry said, taking out his wand. With a swish and flick, Harry levitated the napping lobster-like creature and guided it back to Hagrid, who was beaming at him and Tracy as Harry gently placed the creature down. You might look into getting them some mud, Harry said, placing his wand back in its holster. It went right to sleep in a patch up on the hill there, Tracy remarked, and Hagrid nodded, his smile growing ever wider. 10 points to ya, Miss Davis, for your discovery. Well done, Hagrid said before urging them off to lunch. Harry wasn't sure, but he thought Tracy might have been a bit shocked to have earned points from Hagrid. The two walked together back up to the castle where Tracy went to join Daphne for lunch. Harry was greeted by Hannah and Susan, and decided to join them for lunch. So what do you have this afternoon? Hannah asked as they sat down. Defense, Harry said simply. What's Moody like? Hannah looked at Susan and Harry saw the look of admiration mixed with fear. Susan turned back to Harry and leaned in towards him. He really knows his stuff. But his teaching method is a bit hands-on. Harry gave her a strange look and Hannah picked up the story. He's spent a lot of time so far on the unforgivable curses. In our first lesson he showed us the effects of them on a spider. It gave me nightmares. The next few lessons, he put us all under the Imperious Curse so we'd know what it would feel like. He made me dance in front of everyone while singing. I nearly died of embarrassment. Hannah groaned. There's a lot of people worried that he'll put us all under the Cruciatus next. Susan shivered. He really put you all under the Imperious? Harry asked with concern. Both girls nodded and Harry sat back in his seat looking thoughtful. That doesn't make sense. He's a teacher. He said Dumbledore wanted us all to know what it felt like so we could learn to fight it. Susan said. Harry looked up to the head table where the teachers sat. Dumbledore wasn't present this afternoon, but Moody was there gnawing on a chicken leg. Harry noticed the electric blue magical eye was focused on him at that instant, and Harry had to suppress a shudder. He had been really looking forward to his defense class, as it was one of his favorite subjects. But now he wasn't so sure. Harry was glad to find that the Hufflepuffs had defense with him along with the Gryffindors. Harry took a seat next to Susan and behind Hermione, who smiled in greeting when he tapped her on the shoulder. Moody stomped into class, the door shutting behind him. All right, settle down, settle down. He turned around and Harry got a real good look at the former Auror. He had shoulder-length blonde hair and about 5 days' worth of facial hair, giving him a very grizzled look. His face was a lattice-work of scars and there was a large chunk missing from his nose. When he walked, Harry heard what sounded like heavy wood hitting the floor with every other step. Harry looked closer and saw that Moody's left leg was in fact a prosthesis. Now then, before we start today's lesson, I need to point out that we have a new student joining us. As I don't play favorites, I'd like to ask Potter to come up here. As the rest of you have undergone the Imperious, I think it only fair that Potter get a chance to show off his dancing skills. Moody gave a mirthless laugh. But Harry heard some people whispering and more than a few smiles. Harry stood in front of Moody, who was obviously appraising him. Harry felt very uncomfortable in front of the man, as if Moody could see his deepest secrets or his worst fears. Harry had never felt so unsure of himself before. No, Potter, I'm going to place you under the Imperious Curse, so you will understand what it feels like. And maybe you'll be able to fight it off if someone tries to control you. Before Harry could agree or even ready himself, Moody's wand flashed and he shouted Imperio. It was such a wonderful feeling. Harry was very shocked that he felt so relaxed and carefree. It was like nothing he'd ever felt before. Complete euphoria. He then heard the gruff voice of his new defense teacher, sounding rather distant, yet very insistent. Jump on the desk. Harry turned to look at the desk and he then asked himself, why? The euphoria feeling diminished as he stared at the desk. Jump on the desk. Moody's voice sounded much closer and clearer. Why the hell would I want to jump on a desk? Harry asked. Jump on the desk. No. Harry tried to stop himself from jumping and slammed onto his knees on the stone floor. He lurched forward and cracked his head on the edge of the desk, tearing open his forehead. Well done, boy. Moody laughed, clapping his hands. Did you see it? He turned to the class as Harry got to his feet, holding his bleeding forehead. It was in his eyes. Did you see? Oh, they'll have a time trying to control you, boy. Harry was not encouraged by the defense teacher's good humor. Moody demanded Harry come closer, and he healed Harry's cut and then placed him under the Imperious Curse once again. Harry had an easier time throwing it off this time, which only served to humor Moody further. The old Auror kept Harry by his side, and pointed out all the signs that Harry was fighting the curse. And had Harry tell them how he felt when he was fighting it off. Harry was now beginning to dislike defense class. Then again, he'd never been singled out like this before. Back at Salem, he was just another student. Sure, he usually got the work done before anyone else in defense, but he'd never been the guinea pig before. There was something about Moody that just didn't sit right with Harry either. Though he was sure it was because he was subjecting students to a curse that was quite illegal throughout the world. When class finished, Hermione, Neville, Susan and Hannah all walked with Harry. "Are you all right, Harry?" Hermione asked. "I'll be okay," he said. Truthfully, he just wanted to go to his room and sleep. He felt drained somehow. Clearly, throwing off the Imperius curse took a lot out of a person. Harry idly wondered if Moody had been using all of his strength, and if he hadn't, how would Harry feel if the Auror had been? Susan placed a hand on his shoulder and stopped him. "You really look awful. Maybe you should go lie down or something. You look like you're ready to fall over, Harry." Hannah nodded. Harry thought it was a good idea, and with the girls' and Neville's help, Harry made it back to his room, where he collapsed on the sofa, and fell asleep almost at once. Harry awoke a few hours later, feeling much better. That is until he realized that he had missed dinner, and it was after curfew. "Well, that won't do," Harry said flatly, staring at the clock above the fireplace. Quickly he dug in his bag and pulled the Marauder's map out with a grin and opened it up, activating it with his wand and the passwords. At once the map appeared, and after a quick scan, Harry found the kitchens. Harry headed out into the hall and followed the map, carefully avoiding any of the few roaming teachers and the caretaker. Finally he arrived at a large portrait of a bowl of fruit, and Harry consulted the map to see what he must do next. He smiled with satisfaction as the tiny image of himself on the map began tickling the portrait. Harry folded the map and placed it in his pocket before reaching up to tickle the painting. He started with the apple, and when nothing happened, moved to the banana, then the orange, the grapes, and then the pear. The pear shrieked with laughter, and the painting swung open. Harry slipped inside and was greeted by two house elves wearing Hogwarts tea towels. They both bowed low and asked how they could serve Harry, who thanked them and requested some food, as he had missed dinner. The first elf guided Harry to a small round table, and in a few minutes, several more elves came and all but buried the table with platters of food before bowing low and heading off again. Harry suddenly felt very lonely as he ate. Sitting in the kitchens, eating by himself made him really miss his best friend Mark. The two had been friends since they met in their first year. The two boys were as thick as thieves and often found themselves getting into trouble. But with Sirius Black as your godfather, telling you loads of stories about what he and his friends got up to while they had been in school, how could you not? Harry wondered what Mark would say when he learned that Harry was now a champion in the Triwizard Tournament. Harry smiled to himself as he thought of Mark howling with laughter. Mark would think it was funny, and probably tell Harry he was glad it wasn't him. However, Mark would have been cheering the loudest for Harry. Then when it was over, he'd suggest they go talk to some of the pretty girls. Mark was possibly more girl crazy than Harry, and even smoother. Mark had already had a girlfriend in Rebecca Barklin. Harry had still been working up the courage to ask out Stacy Littleton. Harry decided to write to his friend just as soon as he returned to his room. And he also decided to ask about the possibility of some of his friends coming to watch the tournament. Thinking of Mark and Stacy made Harry begin thinking about all the new people he'd met in the last few days. He smiled when he thought of Tracy. She had asked him out. Harry had been outwardly calm, but inside he'd been jumping for joy. Tracy was very pretty, and he liked her easygoing nature. He even liked that she was also at war with her auburn hair, though Harry was sure that she would eventually win her war. Harry almost wished he could spend the whole day with her. But he was looking forward to seeing Sirius, and telling him all about his first week. He couldn't wait to tell Sirius about all the girls, his classes, the girls, discovering the kitchens, the girls, practice with Cedric, and of course, The girls. Harry finished his meal and thanked the elves closest to him on his way out. They all bowed and waved to him as he left. Harry pulled out the map and consulted it before heading back to his room. He had no problems getting back to his room as nearly all the teachers were back in their rooms. And Filch and someone named Mrs. Norris were on the other side of the castle. When Harry got back in his room, he shut the door and was just about to wipe the map clean when something caught his eye. Harry peered closer to the map and watched it for a few minutes, not sure what he was seeing. In the defense office, a figure tagged as Bartemius Crouch was pacing. Harry thought he recognized the name, but wasn't sure where he knew it from. Harry tried to figure out where he knew that name from, but the more he tried, the further away the answer seemed to get. Giving it up for now, Harry wiped the map and got ready for bed. He went over to his trunk and pulled parchment, ink, and quill out and began crafting a long letter to his best friend. When he finished 2 hours later, he readied the letter for delivery and set it next to his book bag before getting ready for bed. He knew he was in for a long day, as he had potions again. Harry decided as he slipped into bed that he wasn't going to let Snape walk all over him again. By dinner time, the story was all over the school, and the absence of Dumbledore. Snape and Harry Potter seemed to only confirm what was being told. Yet, no one could believe the story. Even those who had witnessed it firsthand were having real difficulty in contemplating all they had seen. Harry had gone to his potions class, which was the second class of the day for him. He had once again taken a seat at a table with Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones, who greeted him with smiles and a few pleasantries. When Snape had entered the class, the students fell silent while their teacher explained the brew they would be attempting today. He hinted that this would be a very difficult potion and that they would need to pay very close attention. Harry could only smile faintly as he recognized the potion. Again, it seemed that Hogwarts was at least a year behind Salem in regards to potions. Once Snape had set them to task, Harry began preparing his ingredients. Susan noticed that he was doing things seemingly out of order. As she was counting out dragonfly wings to buy powdered, Harry was weighing dried rat's eyes. Hannah also noticed Harry working out of order from Snape's instructions. Yet Harry's potion was coming along much better than anyone else's from what the two Hufflepuff girls could see. "How are you doing it?" Susan whispered to Harry as he was checking his heat level. "It's not hard," he said modestly. "You just have to anticipate things a bit, not unlike cooking a fine meal. Some things you can prepare far in advance, some things you have to wait for the right moment. It's mostly about managing your time and your ingredients." He shrugged. "Potter, what is this?" Snape had come up behind Harry and was peering into the boy's cauldron. Harry looked at Snape and felt anger begin to boil in his stomach. "My antidote, Sir," Harry said, trying to sound respectful. It was very hard with Snape peering down on him like he was. "Tell me, Potter. How have you managed to get such a result this early in the class period?" "By following the instructions and being prepared," Harry said, raising his eyebrows. Snape's lip curled and glared at the boy. "You are cheating," Snape said smoothly. "There is no possible way you could have already managed to brew a potion this good in the time I've given you so far." "Actually, sir, I can. As you can clearly see," Harry said, motioning to his cauldron. "I do not stand for cheek, Potter. Now tell me how you did it." Harry sighed and shook his head. He looked back up at Snape and took a deep breath. "I started off by weighing out my rat's eyes. While my fire got hot, I then counted out my dragonfly wings and crushed them to dust in my—" "You are lying," Snape roared. "I have no room in my class for liars or cheats, you little—" "Hey, I can't help it if you're behind," Harry shouted, causing Snape to stare at the boy. "Maybe if you weren't such a substandard teacher, you students would be ready for something more advanced than antidotes. Why are you attacking me for your failures as a teacher?" instead of going around class sneering down your pointed nose. You could offer help to the people you're supposed to be instructing. Why, you rotten little bastard. Snape snarled dangerously. And one more thing, you self-centered piece of shit. I made this potion last year. Snape snapped out his arm and grabbed Harry's robes. Harry tried to pull away from the man's grasp, but Snape had gotten a good strong grasp and was now starting to pull the boy towards the door. Harry dug in his heels, and jerked back, making Snape stumble. The two crashed into the table where Mandy Brocklehurst and Sully were working. Mandy's cauldron got tipped over and landed on Snape's foot, making the man release Harry and grab his foot. The headmaster's office. Now! Snape shouted when he had finally stopped howling in pain. Harry had obeyed, wishing to speak to Dumbledore about the man's actions against him. Dumbledore was clearly shocked when Snape and Harry entered together, though once he saw their faces, his wish that the two would come to a mutual understanding fell away. Severus, Mr. Potter, how may I help you? I wish to inform you of Potter's cheating in class, and his blatant disrespect and foul verbal assault on me in front of my students. Snape glowered. Harry kept his eyes locked on a spot on Dumbledore's desk. Harry. Is this true? Dumbledore asked kindly. I want him punished. Snape screamed with rage. Calm down, Severus. Dumbledore said, now turning back to Harry. Is this true? The verbal part is. Harry said flatly, though it was clear he was trying to control himself. Please sit, both of you. Now, Severus, tell me what happened. Harry listened with his fists balled up as he listened to Snape's version of what had happened, which were clearly embellished. With each lie, Harry's body tensed a bit more. I see. Dumbledore said when Snape finished. Is this what happened, Harry? What are you asking him for? Snape bellowed. I have told you what happened. You have told me your version, Severus. I wish to hear Mr. Potter's side of the story. You want to listen to his lies. Lies. Harry turned, no longer able to hold himself in check. Let's talk about lies, Professor. Harry then explained what had actually taken place in the dungeons, which led to the two of them sitting in the headmaster's office. Snape's sallow skin got redder and redder with suppressed rage until Harry got to the part where the cauldron had fallen on his foot as opposed to Harry throwing it at Snape. That's enough. Yes. I think it is. Dumbledore said sadly. Harry, you are excused. You may wish to head down to lunch. You're letting him go? He should be thrown out of here this instant. Snape stood so quickly that he knocked his chair over. Harry just stood there for a moment until Dumbledore waved him to the door. Harry nodded and left. When the door was closed, Dumbledore turned to Snape and motioned for the man to sit down again. I have hoped for years now that you would come around. That you could be the man I always hoped you could be. That you could embrace the man who was brave enough to oppose Lord Voldemort in order to save the life of a man he despised. I have covered for you for 13 years. Severus. Dumbledore said sadly as he took his seat again and peered over his half-moon spectacles into the dark black eyes of his potions master. What are you talking about? I think you know. Severus. I am not blind, nor am I deaf. I have seen and heard all about your treatment of the students not of Slytherin House. Yet, I have stood up for you all in what now appears to have been a vain hope that you could change. You, Severus, have proven me wrong. Not every soul can be saved, it seems. And now, you have actually assaulted a student. A student who is a guest to outschool, all because of your wounded pride, and a schoolboy grudge. Snape's anger was melting away as he listened to the old headmaster. But he is a boy, plain and simple. Yes, he does look remarkably like his father, but he is not. I dare say he's more like his mother than anything else. Compassionate, caring and sensitive to those who would be bullied by those who think themselves better than everyone else. Traits I'm sure that you remember Lily possessing. Snape went pale as he listened to Dumbledore. He started to speak again, but the old man held up a hand to stop him. When I gave you a home here at Hogwarts, it was because I knew that if left alone, you would have most assuredly been locked away in Azkaban, or worse, killed by those who felt you were at fault for their master's demise, as I am sure you remember. But it was also with the hope that you would become a better man. But, I can no longer afford to have someone on my staff who does not care about his students' success. And so, it is with great regret that I must tell you that you have until the end of the year to make serious improvements. Or I will have to release you from service to this school. You can't be serious, Snape said, rising slowly from his seat again. You know what will happen. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal the darkening tattoo which Dumbledore examined before shaking his head. You have done this to yourself, Severus. I will contact Salem Academy and get a tutor for Harry Potter, but the rest of the students will remain in your care for the remainder of the school year. I will be personally examining their result and conducting year-end interviews with every single student to get a clear view of your performance. If I remain unconvinced that you have truly turned a corner, I will be terminating your employment. If you find this unsatisfactory, you may leave tonight. Snap could only stare at the headmaster for a long time. Anger coursed through him, followed by intense fear. Snape knew what waited him outside the walls of Hogwarts. He would have few options to him. Rejoin the Dark Lord, where he might be, and die in servitude. Leave Hogwarts and pray that the Dark Lord or his followers didn't hunt him down and kill him. Try to find work elsewhere and hope he didn't run into a group of disgruntled ex-students who wanted nothing more than to kill him, or, and this seemed the very worst option to him, swallow his pride. Let go of his hatred and actually become an upstanding teacher who put his students' need first. Snape's head fell forward and he turned to leave. Severus, I am sorry, Dumbledore said, his voice heavy with sadness. But you have done this to yourself. Perhaps if Harry had not been forced to come here. He let the sentence hang between them, and Snape nodded slowly and then left the headmaster. Oh Severus, dear boy. I only wish I knew why you cling so tightly to your anger. It has brought you nothing but heartache all these many years. Harry allowed himself to sleep in an hour on Saturday. He usually took a break from his workouts on the weekend anyway, but the previous night he'd had another training session with Cedric. Cedric was trying to build up Harry's stamina, or at least that's what he'd said. Harry was convinced that Cedric was trying to maim him. Harry was sure it was because he was so popular with the girls, or so Cedric kept telling him. In the last 2 days, Harry had been approached by nearly every student who wasn't a Slytherin and congratulated for his masterful handling of the greasy-haired potions master. It appeared that Harry had actually done what nearly everyone had dreamed of doing. Even Ron Weasley, who had been ignoring Harry and acting as if Harry were something foul he had found on his shoe, had asked to shake Harry's hand. However, despite the praise he had been getting, Harry had been feeling a bit guilty about the things he'd said to Snape. Not that he hadn't meant them. Snape was a dreadful teacher, and clearly disturbed, but Harry had been taught better, and he felt ashamed of himself. So much so that he'd even been thinking of apologizing to the man. It would be much more difficult as Harry no longer had lessons in Snape's class. Dumbledore had sent for him after dinner the night of the incident and informed him that Dumbledore had spoken to his headmistress and that Harry would now be sent his lessons from his old potions teacher, Professor Quilden, and that his work would be turned into Dumbledore himself. Harry had been very pleased to learn that he would not spend the year repeating lessons from his previous year. but still the guilt lingered. Harry wondered if his mother was watching over him right then with a disappointed look on her face. Sirius had often told him that Lily could never tolerate rudeness, or disrespect. It was just one of many reasons Harry treated people the way he did. As Harry finished his shower and got dressed, his thoughts turned from Snape to Tracy Davis. He was preparing for his first ever date, and he wanted very much to make it memorable for both he and Tracy. The auburn-haired girl had very nervously asked Harry to lunch and time together in the village of Hogsmeade, and Harry had accepted. He had only spoken with her for a few minutes the day before, but he was really looking forward to seeing her today. But before that, he would get a chance to visit Sirius. Sirius had moved into a house in the village to be close to Harry, and Harry felt very pleased that he would not be so far away from his beloved godfather. So much had happened this week and Harry couldn't wait to tell Sirius all about it. And then, he and Tracy would be together without the whole school watching them. Harry could feel his heart speed up when he thought about the possibility of holding her hand or even, and Harry gulped at this, kiss her. For all his bravado, Harry was starting to feel terribly insecure just now. Harry saw the clock above his fireplace and quickly finished getting ready. He had promised Hermione that he would join her for breakfast. She had asked him to go to Hogsmeade with her Ginny and Neville, but he explained he'd already had a date with Tracy. Hermione had looked a little down until Harry said he'd join her for breakfast. Hermione was waiting for him at the usual spot just outside the Great Hall. She smiled as he approached and together they went inside. "I'm going to apologize in advance for this," she whispered. Harry gave her a questioning look and before he could ask, they had arrived at the spot Hermione had been guiding them to. "Harry Potter, this is my friend, Ginny Weasley." "Hello," the thin redhead girl said, springing up from her seat and smiling brightly. Harry shook her hand and felt a bit uncomfortable as the handshake lingered. When he raised an eyebrow at her, Ginny quickly let go and blushed, sitting back down and watching him sit on Hermione's other side. "1 week at Hogwarts and look at what you've done." Ginny smiled brightly as Harry reached for a platter of sausages. "I wish I could have seen you hit Snape." "I didn't hit him," Harry said looking at the redhead sharply. Ginny looked confused. "I heard Colin say that you hit Snape in the face," Ginny said, now sounding less enthusiastic. "Colin's not in Harry's class," Hermione said flatly. "I know," Ginny said looking at her friend, still blushing a bit. "But Fred and George both said they heard some Ravenclaws talk about it." "I didn't hit him," Harry said again. "Wanted to, but it would have just made things loads worse." "What happened anyway?" "I heard he dragged you to the headmaster's office," Hermione asked, looking interestedly at Harry who shrugged. "Snape tried to make it sound a lot worse than it really was. Like I'd leapt over desks to try and murder him. Dumbledore let me tell my side, and then told me to go to lunch. I don't know what happened then. After dinner though, Dumbledore asked me to come to his office and he told me that I'd be getting my lessons from my old potions teacher and be turning them into Dumbledore. Actually I'm really happy about that. I didn't want to spend a year repeating stuff I'd already done, you know." "Okay, now I'm jealous," Hermione said with a light smile. "I could loan you my notes sometime," Harry offered and Hermione's face brightened. "Oh now you've done it," Ginny said, rolling her eyes. "I don't know if you know this, but our Hermione is a sponge for knowledge. It's like a drug to her." "There's nothing wrong with being intellectual," Hermione said with a bit of indignance. "Unless it isolates you from the rest of the world. You're 15, you're supposed to be making boys drool over you and breaking their hearts, or sneaking off to have a snog with someone special." Ginny grinned, winking at Harry. Why can't she do both? Both girls looked at Harry and he suddenly wished he hadn't said anything. What do you mean? Ginny asked. Harry took a long drink of his orange juice before he spoke again. Hermione's right. There's nothing wrong with being an intellectual. In fact, it's something to be admired. However, you're right to Ginny. You shouldn't let it prevent you from missing out on the rest of what life has to offer you. I'm not saying you should go snog every boy you see, Hermione. But, a date every now and again isn't so bad. Hermione stared at him looking as if she wanted to argue, but at the same time as if she was seriously thinking about what he'd said. Ginny on the other hand looked at Hermione triumphantly. Harry wondered how often the two girls had this argument. Good morning, Harry. Harry turned to see two girls sitting across from him. The first girl was a pretty girl with dark skin and silky jet black hair with an ornamental butterfly comb set in it. The other was a buxom blonde with sparkling brown eyes and a wicked-looking smirk. It was the blonde who had spoken and she was leering at him flirtatiously. Good morning," he said. "Harry, this is Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown. They're in our year, and my roommates," Hermione said, and Harry heard a bit of exasperation in her voice. Harry said hello and the two girls began filling their plates with fruit and toast. "Big plans for Hogsmeade, Harry?" Lavender asked, smiling at him. "I'm meeting my godfather for a bit and then I'm going to have lunch with Tracy Davis," Harry said easily. Parvati gave a stifled giggle and Lavender's eyes widened. Hermione and Ginny both gave sharp intakes of breath, and Harry turned to look at them pointedly. "Is this a romantic type lunch?" Lavender asked with a syrupy sweet voice, leaning forward a bit. "I don't know." Harry shrugged. "Maybe. She's going to be the envy of nearly every girl in the school," Parvati said, and Lavender agreed. "You're a very popular topic on conversation with the female populace, you know that though, don't you?" Lavender grinned. "It's every boy's dream to have girls talking about him, so long as it's positive," Harry said. He was noticing that Lavender was almost leaning across the table, and an idea occurred to him. Lavender was trying to flirt with him. This could be fun, he thought, and turned a little in his seat so he was facing her directly, locking his eyes with hers. "Oh, it's most definitely in the positive. Especially after the story about you kissing that Ravenclaw girl made the rounds. You've got every girl in this school wondering what it's like to have you press them up against a wall and stare deep in their eyes as you inch ever closer." Harry got a wry smile on his face as he stared at Lavender and he leaned forward in his seat a bit. "Are you one of those girls?" Parvati's breath hitched and Harry heard Ginny give a small wistful sigh. Lavender held Harry's stare, however, returning his smile. "Being pressed up against a wall for a snog doesn't quite set my heart aflutter, if you catch my meaning. I need something a bit more stimulating." Lavender flicked her wrist as if waving of a fly. Harry's smile grew as he sat back, keeping his eyes locked with hers. "So what you're saying is you'd need a bloke to shove you hard against a wall, grab your hair and pull it hard before he snogged you until you couldn't stand up without help." Harry had heard blokes at his old school talk like this, and even heard some girls whisper about things like this when they thought no one was listening. He'd always thought it a bit wrong somehow, possibly because he couldn't think why anyone would want to be approached so forcefully. But then again, he'd never snogged anyone. But he was not going to back down here. It was a matter of pride, right? Besides, he must have done this right if Lavender's face was any indication. The blonde had sat back, her eyes wide now and her face burning crimson. "Okay, stop it," Hermione said, interrupting the sparring match between Harry and Lavender. Some of us don't need those kind of mental images. I could stand a few more, Ginny said quietly, though Harry was able to hear her. He smiled a bit more, never taking his eyes off Lavender as she sat back a bit more, breathing a bit heavy. Parvati grabbed Lavender and whispered in her ear, making Lavender's eyes get a bit bigger. Then she nodded. "Come on, Hermione, this is good," Harry said quickly. "I'm really learning a lot about the people here at Hogwarts." "No, you're not," Hermione said, pushing on Harry's shoulder. "You're simply trying to get Lavender to blush, which you've done. You should be finishing your breakfast. The carriages to the village will be arriving soon." Harry finally broke his eye contact with Lavender. Hermione had said the right thing, and despite the fun he was having, he really wanted to see his godfather, and he didn't want to be late for his afternoon with Tracy. Lavender let out a long breath when Harry averted his eyes, which made Harry smile again. Harry was impressed with himself. He'd never been good at flirting, but this girl had just riled him up a bit, and he had really enjoyed it, though in truth he'd hardly knew what to say or do. Yet he was sure he'd won. He hoped that he could do it again sometime soon. When he'd finished, Harry got up from his seat with Hermione and Ginny, and they headed out to where the carriages lined up and got in line with other students. During the trip down to Hogsmeade, Ginny kept up a steady stream of conversation. Hermione simply alternated between looking out the window or giving Harry apologetic looks. Harry understood that she had been forced into introducing Harry to Ginny, and from her expression Hermione had expected Ginny to be unable to shut up for a second. When the carriages came to stop in the middle of Hogsmeade, Harry bade Hermione and Ginny goodbye and headed up the hill towards Sirius' house. "Harry," Sirius said, rising from the breakfast table as Harry entered the house. Remus was also there, piling sausages on a plate. Sirius grabbed his godson and hugged him tightly. Harry held tight to his godfather until Sirius pulled away and offered a chair to Harry, who sat down as Remus placed a glass of juice in front of the boy. "How's your first week been?" Remus asked, and Harry beamed. "You're going to love this," Harry said, launching into his story. Sirius and Remus gave sympathetic frowns when Harry told them about how nervous he'd felt having to walk in front of everyone that first dinner. But then roared with laughter when he confessed to having been kissed by Luna, whom he didn't even know at that point. Sirius smiled very proudly when Harry mentioned all the girls he'd met so far and how he already had a date later that day. The mood in the house darkened, however, when Harry relayed the story about Snape. "He what?" Sirius looked murderous. "Grabbed me by my shirt and started to drag me out of the class. But then I pulled away and we both lost balance and crashed into a table. A cauldron fell on his foot, and after he stopped screaming, he got kind of scary, you know," Harry said, looking to the two adults. "What happened next?" Remus said coolly. Harry went on, telling them about how Snape had tried to make Dumbledore believe Harry had attacked him. Dumbledore had allowed Harry to relay his side of the story and then excused him, and now he was going to get his lessons by mail. Sirius snarled and pounded his fist on the table. "I still don't understand it," he said. "What does Dumbledore think he's doing allowing that son of a bitch teach students? For the love of Merlin, he was a Death Eater." "What?" Harry asked, sitting up straighter. "Are you joking?" "No, he's not," Remus said flatly. "He was right in Voldemort's inner circle, from what I understand. However," he said, turning to Sirius, "he made my Wolfsbane potion all year last year, and I was fine. And let's not forget he was the one to tell Dumbledore about Voldemort's desire to kill Harry." "Okay, I'm really lost here," Harry said. Sirius took a very deep breath before beginning. "I've told you over the years how we made Snape our punching bag. We were absolutely cruel to him. In some ways, I wonder if it was because of us that Snape ended up joining the Death Eaters to begin with. I think it unlikely. Slytherin House was filled with up-and-coming Death Eaters, and the peer pressure would have been immense. Remus sighed. Either way. What I've never told you was that when we started school, Snape and your mother had been friends. Over the years though, they grew apart. I think it had a lot to do with the people Snape surrounded himself with. Pure-blood bigots who thought Lily just another mood-blood. They had a very big fight right after our owl tests. Most of the school saw it, Remus went on. So far as I know, it was the last time they spoke while at school, but we always noticed that Snape would stare at Lily every chance he got. Did he love her? Harry asked, slightly shaken. Sirius and Remus could only shrug. We were young and didn't care about his feelings at all. He was a greasy-haired git to us. However, after 5th year, I can't remember any time we picked on him again. Sirius sat back in his chair. Your father tried to keep us from bothering him. I think he was beginning to grow up a bit. By the end of the year, he finally had Lily's eye. The next year, they were dating. Remus continued the story. When we left school, James and I entered the Auror training, and your parents married. By then, the war was reaching its peak. Sirius said. A few nights after Dumbledore convinced you parents to go into hiding, I heard a rumor that Snape had come to Dumbledore trying to convince him to make James and Lily hide. Whatever the reason had been, your parents agreed, and they brought all the Marauders back together. By then we knew there was a spy in the Order. We all suspected each other, but James still believed in us. I was sure it was Remus. He had been unable to keep a job, and the werewolves all seemed to be joining Voldemort. I thought Sirius the traitor. Remus sighed, looking sad. Given his family history and his long disappearances, which turned out to be him following Death Eaters, I was convinced that Sirius was the spy. James and Lily wanted to make me the secret keeper. They were going to place themselves under the Fidelius's charm. I convinced them to use Peter. Sirius said heavily. And he was the one who turned out to be the spy. Harry said, knowing this story. I asked Dumbledore the night I got you if it was true. If it had been Snape who'd told Dumbledore that Voldemort was after them. He told me it was, and it was then that I knew that I'd been wrong. I owed Snape. But it didn't change what he'd done. He'd killed innocent people. He would kill James given the chance. Despite what he did to try and protect you and your family, he was still guilty of killing and gods know what else. When he was never even brought before the courts. Sirius shook his head. He should have gone to Azkaban. Sure, a reduced sentence for turning spy in the end, but he should have been made to pay for what he'd done. Dumbledore protected him. Remus said, picking up the thread. The thing is, Snape was going to be hunted by those who remained faithful to Voldemort. Those who snaked their way out of a prison sentence would know that Snape had turned spy. If he became a teacher, he'd be under Dumbledore's protection, and even Voldemort was afraid of Dumbledore. But he apparently turned his bitterness onto students. Sirius said. I've been feeling bad about what I said to him the other day. Harry said after a long silence. He just made me so angry. I mean, he just... I know, Harry. Sirius said reassuringly. Snape's always had the ability to make those around him very irritated. But it was still wrong of me to lash out at him. I feel like I should apologize. Remus looked at Sirius with awe while Sirius smiled proudly. I don't know if I should hug you or shake you. He laughed, making Harry look at him. Even though he likely deserved everything you said at him, you feel bad about it. You Harry are a far better person than we were at your age. But, I want you to be careful around Snape. For all we know it could have been he that placed your name in the goblet of fire. How would he have known I was alive? Harry asked. Sirius shrugged. Dumbledore is positive that he was the only one in all of Britain to know the truth, but I would never put anything past Snape. He may have tried to save your life once, but one good deed does not make up for a lifetime of evil. How are you getting along with preparing for the tournament? Remus asked. All right. Harry shrugged. Cedric's been showing me some interesting spells that he thinks might help. I've learned a shield spell and a blasting hex. I just wish I had a clue as to what the first task could be. We're keeping our ears and eyes open, Sirius said reassuringly. If we see or hear anything, we'll send word right away. You just keep working hard. They talked for another few hours and Harry found out that Sirius and Remus were trying to find out the location of the traitor Peter Pettigrew. They were both intent on bringing their former friend to justice. They then regaled him with many more tales about adventures at Hogwarts. Harry found it fascinating to hear some stories that Sirius had told him from a different point of view. Getting close to noon, Sirius said after a rather embarrassing story about himself and a sixth-year prefect girl being discovered in a very compromising position by Harry's father and mother. Don't you have a date? Right. Harry said, getting to his feet, his face becoming very anxious looking. Sirius laughed and gave a pointed look at Remus, who smiled in return. Relax, Harry, Sirius said calmly. Just remember what I've always told you. Be respectful, listen to her and be polite. And above everything else, be yourself. She wants to be with you, not some fictional hero, but you, Harry. Harry nodded and turned to go. Sirius stopped him and gave him a firm hug and Remus shook his hand. Then, after he got directions to the Three Broomsticks Tavern, left in a rush. I wonder, will he be like you? Remus smirked, looking at his friend. Snogging every girl he sees, or will he be like James and just pine after one girl? I'm hoping he'll be a bit of both. Sirius smiled. Play the field until he finds his perfect match, then treat that girl like a princess for the rest of his life. Tracy Davis woke a bit later than she had wanted to, but excited all the same. She and Daphne had spent a great deal of time trying to put together the perfect outfit for Tracy's date. Tracy had wanted a skirt to show off her legs, but Daphne pointed out that it was likely to be too chilly now that winter was coming. And Tracy reluctantly agreed that she didn't want to be freezing all day. In the end, Daphne loaned her friend a very nice pair of jeans and the two girls picked out a faded blue jumper that Daphne was sure would accentuate Tracy's assets nicely. After Tracy finished her shower, she and Daphne set to work on Tracy's usually uncooperative auburn hair. Daphne said it would be good for Tracy to keep it out of her face, as Harry seemed to like staring into her eyes. Giving herself one long last look in the mirror before going off to breakfast, Tracy was very confident that she was in for a very pleasant afternoon. Tracy and Daphne went up to a late breakfast. After all, Tracy was not about to go into Hogsmeade just to wait nervously for Harry and looking like an idiot. Daphne had offered to wait with her, maybe even doing a bit of shopping, but Tracy had said that she and Harry were going to do that after lunch. Tracy ate a light breakfast and after a bit, decided that it was okay to go into the village. During the carriage ride, Tracy discovered that Daphne was planning on meeting Blaise Zabinai. Since when did you start talking to Zabinai? Tracy asked. I don't know. Daphne shrugged, her cheeks coloring a bit. He asked me to meet him, and what with you and Potter getting together? Well, of all the boys in our house, he's clearly the best looking, but, you know, you don't have to only meet boys from Slytherin. Some of those Durmstrang blokes aren't bad on the eyes. I know. Daphne said flatly, looking out the window at the forest passing by. But, I like Blaze. I don't know. All right. But I want details later. Tracy said pointedly. Daphne gave her a wry smile and the carriage came to a halt and the girls got out. Well, I've got an hour before I'm supposed to meet Harry. Tracy said anxiously. I have no idea why I'm so nervous. Just calm down. Daphne laughed. You'll be fine. Just keep things light. Talk to him like you do any other time. Just relax and have fun. You're not leaving me, are you? Tracy asked with panic evident in her voice. Yeah, I am. Daphne smiled. I have a date, and I don't want to be late. She gave a wave and started off, leaving Tracy standing feeling very stupid. She shook her head, trying to clear her head and not overthink her coming meeting with Harry. She stepped into the main road and decided to go to Skrinvenschafts to get a few things she needed. She didn't think Harry would want to spend too much time looking at quills and parchment. Tracy saw Pansy Parkinson and Millicent Bulstrode walking into Honeydukes across the road. Tracy shivered at the thought of Pansy spying her with Harry. Pansy had not stopped harping on how ugly and rude Harry was. Ever since his first meeting with Harry, Draco had harped on and on to anyone who would listen about Harry's inflated ego and clear lack of power. Draco hadn't liked being made to look like an idiot. He'd been insulting Daphne and Tracy at every turn for their terrible taste in friends. Tracy turned her mind to think about Harry. They had met the day before to finalize when they would meet. Harry had actually appeared as nervous as she felt when they spoke, but he had smiled and told her that he was very eager to go to Hogsmeade with her. He had ran his hand through his hair, messing it up worse than it had been, and Tracy had found it very endearing. Tracy checked her watch as she took her new quills up to the counter. She had about 20 minutes until she was to meet Harry, so she figured she'd take a leisurely stroll towards the pub. She was looking in the window of Gladrags when she saw Harry's reflection across the street. She turned and saw him going into the post office. Deciding to surprise him, Tracy ran across the street and into the post office. There were a handful of people in there and Tracy was able to get right behind Harry, who was paying for an international letter delivery. A letter home? Tracy asked. Harry turned and smiled widely as he saw her. Hi. You look. Wow. Harry said, looking her over. Tracy made a mental note to thank Daphne for her help. Yeah. Harry said, remembering that she had asked him a question. I was sure I had time to get in here and send off a letter to my friend. Harry turned back to Tracy, a horrified look on his face. I'm not late, am I? No. Tracy grinned. I was across the street on my way to the pub when I saw you come in here. I figured we could walk there together. If that's okay. No, I'd like that. Harry smiled. He got his change from the man behind the counter and watched him tie the letter to a large horned owl, who swept off the instant the letter was attached. Harry turned to Tracy and with a wave of his hand, they headed off to lunch together. So, did you see your godfather? She asked, looking at him. He nodded. Yeah, he was really happy to hear all about what I've been getting up to. He was really mad about what happened with Snape. Did you get in trouble? Tracy asked with concern. Oh no. He wasn't mad at me. He knew Snape in school, they didn't like each other, and he was mad that Snape had tried to hurt me, even though I don't think he really would have hurt me. At least, I hope not. Anyway, we talked about other stuff after that. He's really worried about the tournament. I'd forgotten about it. Which is weird because you're here and so are the other two schools, but, you know, nothing's really happened yet. I think we've all forgotten about it, really. They arrived at the Three Broomsticks, and Harry opened the door to allow Tracy to enter and followed her inside. Harry took in the tavern with a smile. There were loads of students from Hogwarts as well as Durmstrang and Beauxbatons enjoy the warmth and the company. Harry was assaulted by the heavenly aromas of food coming from somewhere, and Tracy grinned at his face. "Shall we find a table?" Harry followed her in the crowd and they found a small table near a window. In a moment a tall, very attractive woman greeted them and gave a start when she saw Harry. "My goodness, it's very nice to meet you, Mr. Potter," the woman said, offering her hand. Harry shook it with a puzzled expression on his face. "What can I get you?" Tracy and Harry ordered food and butterbeers, which the woman, who Tracy identified as Madame Rosmerta, brought to their table and told them their food would be up in a few moments. "So, if it isn't too forward, may I ask who you were writing to?" Tracy asked after taking a sip from her drink. "My best friend, Mark. He's still on break, but I wanted to tell him about everything that's been happening. He's been my friend since I started school, and it would just suck if I came back to school to find he was gone. I didn't want to do that to him." "That's really nice of you," Tracy said. "Nah, it's just courteous. Truth is, I've been having such a good time that I've hardly thought about any of my friends. I miss them all. I'm hoping to ask Dumbledore if we can arrange for some of them to come watch the tasks." "Did you have a girlfriend?" Tracy blushed as she asked it, but nowhere near as bad as Harry did, who choked on his butterbeer. Harry stammered, wiping at his face. "No." Madame Rosmerta brought their food and set it before them before winking at Harry and leaving them again. "No, I didn't have a girlfriend. I was trying to get close to a girl, who kissed me right before break, but nothing other than that. In fact," he said, looking up into Tracy's very dark brown eyes, and smiling very nervously. "To be perfectly honest, this is the first date I've ever been on." "Really?" Tracy asked, looking surprised. Yeah." Harry shrugged. "Wow," Tracy said, looking at him with wonder. "I just assumed. Well, this is my first date too." Harry brightened up a bit. Tracy felt her cheeks heat up and bent her head back to her meal. Before they could speak any more, someone came to their table. "Hello." Tracy looked up and smiled to see Daphne along with Blaise Zabinai. "We were just on our way out, and wanted to say hello," Daphne said. "I'll see you later tonight, then." "Okay." Tracy smiled. "It was nice to see you again, Harry," Daphne said, and Blaise gave a slight nod of his head as they turned to go. Tracy watched them go. "I'm still rather shocked," she said. "About what?" Harry asked, looking at her as she continued to watch her friend leave. She turned back to Harry before she continued. "Daphne has been more or less hounded by boys since we started school. She's very pretty and her family is very well off. Not just money-wise, but power as well. Daphne told me that her father gets loads of marriage contracts for her and her sister every year, some of them from some really disgusting old men. Well, a lot of boys have tried to lay claim to her. During our second year, she started becoming cold and distant whenever we weren't in our room. She told me that her mother helped her come up with this whole attitude that should help keep away unwanted attention, and it worked." Tracy shrugged. "So you're shocked to see her with a boy?" Harry asked. "A little. She only told me this morning," Tracy admitted. "That's why she was so standoffish with you at first. She just assumes the worst of everyone. But she looked happy." Oh no. Harry noticed that Tracy was now looking at a group of girls approaching their table. Harry had seen them all in school, but had not yet learned any of their names. The girl in the lead had black hair to her shoulders, and a cold sneer on her face. "Well, Tracy," hidden in a corner with Harry Potter, the girl said with an air of superiority. "Hello, and you are?" Harry asked politely. The girl just sneered at Harry and he was reminded of Snape. "A school full of respectable and good-looking men, and you're here with a boy," the girl continued. "No one invited you to join us, pansy," Tracy snapped. "I was just concerned for my fellow Slytherin," Pansy said with a very fake tone of concern. She even put her hand to her heart. "I mean, what kind of friend would I be if I didn't point out that you could have been here with someone respectable like Theology?" "No one asked you, Pansy," Tracy hissed. Harry could tell that this girl, Pansy, was just trying to irritate Tracy, and he wasn't about to let anyone ruin this date if he could help it. "Excuse me, I don't want to be rude here, but you're kind of making that impossible. So I'll say this as nicely as I can. Go away." Pansy turned to look at Harry with a sinister smile on her face. "I was not talking to you, Potter." She snapped her gaze back on Tracy, who was looking murderous. "I would think that you'd prefer someone of nobler parentage, Tracy. Wasn't it you who said that all the mudbloods should be thrown into the lake and left to drown?" Harry turned to look at Tracy's, whose eyes had grown into the size of saucers, her face draining of color. "Yes, I do remember quite clearly that you felt that all the mudbloods should be fed to Slytherin's beast. That we'd be much better off if anyone who was born of a muggle was smothered in their cribs." Tracy shot out of her seat and ran right out of the Three Broomsticks, leaving Pansy laughing along with her friends, and Harry sitting there stunned. He rose slowly and stood a head taller than Pansy, staring at her coldly. Pansy was still laughing as Harry bent a little towards her and spoke very calmly. "I wonder if you believe in karma," he said. Pansy laughed harder at Harry. "What?" she asked, trying to get under control again. "See, you've just made my list, and as there's no one else on it at the moment, all my attention is going to be focused on you. But I'm pretty easygoing, so I'll offer you the chance to apologize to Tracy for everything you've done here. Otherwise, I'm going to make you life hell." Something in his tone, or perhaps it was his cold stare, that sobered Pansy, but as Harry stepped by her, Pansy shivered. She had never been afraid of anyone or anything, save some of the things Hagrid had brought for them to study. But as she watched Harry pay for his meal, something inside Pansy was screaming at her to do as Potter said. Fortunately, her pride was much louder and she simply scoffed, calling to the girls who were with her to follow. After all, what could Potter really do to her? Harry left the Three Broomsticks and looked up and down the street for any sign of Tracy. There were loads of people, but he couldn't see any sign of his date. "Hi, Harry." Harry turned and saw Sully and Morag McDougal approaching. Harry smiled, but kept scanning the crowds. Hi. Have either of you seen Tracy Davis?" he asked. The two girls looked at each other and then shook their heads. "No, why?" "Never mind," Harry said. "I'll see you later." Harry headed up the road and then back down the other side. There was no sign of his date anywhere. After searching for nearly an hour, Harry figured that Tracy must have gone back up to the castle. "Harry." Harry turned and saw Daphne and Blaise approaching. "Hey," Harry said dejectedly. "Where's Tracy?" Daphne asked, her visage becoming hard. "That's what I'd like to know," Harry replied, leaning against a wall and hanging his head. "What did you do to her?" Daphne asked, her voice becoming hard, and her eyes narrowing. Nothing. Harry's head snapped up. She took off after Pansy said a bunch of stuff. Daphne's face glare softened at once, and even Blaise let out a low whistle. Oh no. Daphne moaned. Do I even want to know what she said? She went on about how Tracy felt the Mudbloods should all be killed. Oh, that. Daphne said, rolling her eyes. I'm going to let you in on Tracy's deepest, darkest secret, something she's very ashamed of. When we first came to Hogwarts, Tracy had the biggest crush on Draco Malfoy. She liked him so much that she started to change herself so he would notice her, until she became something that even she couldn't stand. Our friendship was nearly destroyed. Let me guess, she was anti-Muggleborns during this time? Harry asked, and Daphne nodded. Right in one. Then, in second year, after some people got petrified, and I stopped talking to her, well, she did a bit of soul searching. Long story short, she realized that Draco was a scumbag, and that she wanted something better. Someone she wouldn't have to change herself for. She never struck me as being one of those pure-blood bigots. Harry said. She's as far from it as one can get. Blaise said in a very deep voice. Harry couldn't remember hearing his voice before. There are very few of us in Slytherin House who don't subscribe to that sort of thinking, and we don't go shouting about it. It makes life more difficult. Any chance you know where she might have gone? Harry asked the two. Likely back to the castle. Daphne shrugged. Harry nodded sadly. Well, so much for our date. Then he suddenly lit up and smiled. Is there any way you can get her to meet me somewhere tonight? Daphne looked uncertain, but after a moment she nodded. I think so. Good. Harry then went on to explain what he had in mind. Daphne's smile grew ever wider as she listened. Tracy had gone straight to her dorm after running all the way back to the castle. She was exhausted and miserable. What Harry must think of her. All Tracy wanted to do was punch Pansy in her squashed face. Tracy had cried miserably for 20 minutes after she'd gotten to her bed, but after her long run and everything else, Tracy fell into a restless sleep. She was shaken awake by Daphne, who was smiling in a sympathetic sort of way. I ran into Harry. Daphne said, sitting on Tracy's bed as the other girl sat up. Does he hate me? Tracy asked miserably. No, but he is concerned. You ran off and he spent an hour trying to find you before he ran into me and Blaise. He told me everything, and well, I sort of explained a few things to him. You told him about my crush on the blonde Ponce. Tracy felt her cheeks get hot. Kind of had to. But he knows it's in the past. Listen, he wants to see you. Tonight, in fact. What? Tracy looked up, clearly surprised. Daphne just nodded. He says he feels cheated that you ran off, and wants you to meet him for dinner. I can't. I can't go to the Great Hall and... He doesn't want to meet in the Great Hall. Daphne said. Tracy looked confused and Daphne explained everything. Tracy reluctantly agreed, and at 7:30, she followed the instructions Daphne had given to her, and found Harry waiting for her, leaning against a large portrait of a bowl of fruit. Hi. She said very nervously. Hi. Harry smiled easily. You kind of left me hanging this afternoon. We were supposed to go shopping. I'm sorry. Tracy said softly. Harry smiled and offered his hand. Doesn't matter. I understand. But I think a first date should be something you look back on fondly, you know. With that, Harry turned and tickled the pair in the picture. Tracy had often wondered where the kitchens were located, but had never thought to look for them. Harry led her by 4 long tables that were clearly mirrors of the 4 house tables in the Great Hall. She saw dozens of house elves who were clearing the tables, and bowing whenever they caught Tracy's eye. Harry stopped in front of a small round table with 2 chairs and 2 plates set out with several platters of food. I figured this way no one can interrupt our meal. Harry smiled, and Tracy couldn't help but smile. Thank you, Harry. Listen, Harry said as he helped her into her seat. I may need your help. See, I think that girl that bothered us earlier need to be taught a serious lesson. Please like and subscribe.